Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be listening to When Burnout Isn't What You Expect, Managing Stress, Wellbeing, and Sustainability, a session that was presented at Winter Institute 2026 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
All right, we're going to get started. Can everybody hear us okay? So first and foremost, I want to say thank you for coming to the final education session of the conference. Congratulations, we're almost done. You made it. We're going to get through this together. I'm as tired as you are. I'm Fred Rosero from Oblong Books in the Millerton location of New York's Hudson Valley. I've been a bookseller for about 5 years now, coming up on it. But I'm also lucky to have learned a lot from booksellers in my store who have been in the business for decades. This session is going to be structured a little different than some of the other ones you might have been to. It's mostly going to be a discussion between me and Dr. Goldman, and then we're going to have a little exercise at the end. So I'll let Dr. Goldman introduce herself.
Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. As Fred said, thank you for joining us for the last session today. I'm a clinical psychologist out of New York City, and I'm also clinical assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And the most recent title that I can now add to my list is I'm an author of a book coming out. Thank you. A book coming out April 7th on pre-order now. And I'm super excited to be here with all of you talking about stress and burnout, which is really the core of this book called When Life Happens, because life is happening if we like it or not. And, hopefully by the end of this session, you will have a few more tools in your toolbox to be able to help you better navigate life as it is happening.
If you want to do those slides. So I've got to do some housekeeping right in the beginning. On the ABA app, you can find the slides, the handouts, and resources. We've got a resource slide at the end for anything you might need. There are clickable links on that, as well as some numbers to text or call. There's a survey at the end. Please fill it out so we know how great we did. Only great. There will be recordings of this session, like the other sessions. Just make sure that at the end during the Q&A, you speak into the microphone. That's an accessibility thing, and it makes sure that the recording can make it up onto the website. If you can just silence your headphones, and as I mentioned, wait for the mic. You've seen this slide enough. It doesn't really we're not going to be covering antitrust stuff in here, so I think we can pass this one, but you know the deal. So we're going to first talk about kind of what burnout is, and move on into what makes bookselling a unique environment for burnout, and so such a ripe environment for burnout. Talk a little bit about workplace culture, boundaries, support, all the stuff that I can talk about all day. And then, as I mentioned, at the end, we're going to have an activity. We're going to have you, talk in groups at your tables about the things that you automatically go to as coping skills, and maybe whether or not they're serving you, and what maybe you could add to your toolbox. So as I mentioned, this is what we're going to be doing, and we're going to start it out with a grounding exercise just to get us all in the mindset to maybe breathe, think, and take it all in.
Great, thank you. So it is the end of the day, and it's probably been a long day or a long week for several of you. And my hope is that we can all be present here right now together. So I always like to teach what's called diaphragmatic breathing. It is a breathing exercise, but most people, when I say take a deep breath, naturally would do this. Now, of course, I exaggerated that a little bit, but what that actually does is not relaxing at all. It does the complete opposite of what a breathing exercise should do for us by tightening everything up. So diaphragmatic breathing is breathing through our diaphragm. Stand up, actually. actually. It's breathing through our diaphragm, and I'm going to teach it, and then we can all do it together. Okay. So I want you to put both feet flat on the floor. And of course, if you're not comfortable doing this for whatever reason, also don't feel like you have to. It does feel a little awkward sometimes if you've never done proper deep breathing. But when we practice, I always recommend that we put one hand on our chest and one hand on our belly. And the reason you don't need to do this like all the time when you're taking a deep breath, but when you're practicing, it's really important because I want you to be able to acknowledge and notice if you're breathing more through your chest like this or through your diaphragm. Okay. So I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit, but demonstrate it. When we take a deep breath in, our belly is actually going to expand like there's a balloon in our stomach. Okay. So I'm going to breathe in through my nose while my belly expands. And then I'm going to exhale through my mouth as if I'm blowing out through a straw and my belly goes back in. Or blowing out birthday candles. So just for you to see for a moment, I'm going to take a breath in. You saw I really pushed my stomach out doing that. You don't have to do that, but I wanted you to say. You might feel at the beginning almost like you're doing that exercise. You're like tapping your head and circling your belly at the same time. It feels a little awkward, but I want to do it together. I want you to take a breath through your nose. Let your belly expand. And now exhale through your mouth. And let it out. Take a breath in. And out. If your hand is on your chest and you're noticing your chest moving more than your stomach, it's going to move a little bit. Try to focus on moving your chest and your shoulders less. Take a breath in. And out. Let's take one more together. Ready? Take a breath in. And exhale. As you're doing that, maybe on your own for another moment, I want you to just any thoughts that come to mind, just kind of put them aside in your head. And I want you to say to yourself, these are just thoughts. I can attend to them later. And then when you're ready, take one more deep breath in. If you closed your eyes, you could take a breath out and open your eyes. So, do you mind if I ask a question real quick? Okay. So, does anybody want to share how that experience was? And there's not a wrong answer. Anybody?
Microphone is coming.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. This is an impromptu.
Hi. I've done breathing like that before. I do a lot of yoga.
Awesome.
But it's always a good reminder that that's a tool in my toolbox.
Love it.
I really liked that little mantra of these are just thoughts. I can attend to them later because I tend to get very overwhelmed by things that feel time sensitive or urgent and aren't necessarily and definitely are not so much so that I can't take some good deep breaths for 3 seconds. So that was a really nice reminder. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that you said that. And it's something I say a lot, that thoughts are just thoughts. They are not facts. And many times we need to just put them aside and we can come back to them later. And many times when we come back to it later, we kind of forgot about it. Like we don't even need to come back to it because it was just kind of a fleeting thought. Anybody else, one other person want to share their experience or how that felt? Was it relaxing? Did it feel good? Was it calming? Was it anxiety provoking? Was it stressful? For some people it is. That's why I'm mentioning that.
Well, I'll share for me, especially the comment about the thoughts. I have ADHD, so when the thoughts pop into my head, there's like an 80 to 90% chance that I will forget them. And that leads me to wanting to hold on to them even more and really buying into them. So one of my coping skills often is writing things down so that I can forget things later. But it's really good to know, like, why those thoughts feel so important to you in the moment. And it's always nice to have a check-in with my body rather than everything that's spinning around in my head.
I love that you said that because I actually was going to say, I recommend that you write them down because oftentimes our thoughts are on replay in our head. Like overnight, if people have difficulty sleeping, that's part of the reason for some people. And I usually say, just jot it down and then you can come back to it later. So good. Well, I hope that at least allowed us to kind of hit the reset button and to be right here, right now, present together. And I want to remind you, and we'll say this again later, that is something you can always go back to. And just by hitting the reset button, taking a few deep breaths or intentional breaths. And we'll get into that a little bit more with the toolbox.
So I guess now we want to talk about what burnout is. And the title of the session is, talking about when burnout is unexpected. And I want to speak to that a little bit because I think burnout is something that is talked about almost exclusively in a workplace setting. But I want to really acknowledge that we are whole human beings, and burnout, just like any other thing, cannot be disconnected from what's going on in the news, what's going on in our life, whether or not we're a marginalized person who has their particular marginalization splashed across news headlines every day. All of those things, our home lives, the things we struggle with internally, none of that can be separated from the burnout we're feeling at work. So for me, the signs of burnout, when I was first invited to do this session, my initial thought was, oh, well, I've never really felt burnout in bookselling. Am I qualified for that? And I had to really sit with that for a little while and think about it. And I realized eventually that it's not so much that I've never experienced burnout in bookselling. It's that I've never experienced crisis in burnout. So often what we think about with burnout is people just totally checking out, needing to take a sabbatical, needing to take a break, needing to leave the industry entirely. And I haven't gotten there, but that's because I've experienced these symptoms, burnout, everything in previous parts of my life. And I've learned the coping skills so that when I see the signs starting in myself, I know there's like a little red flag that goes up in my head, and I can start to address them and get myself to a bit of a better place.
And you're the perfect partner for me to have up on this stage today, because that is literally what my book is about, that I want you to have the tools that you need. So when you're in crisis or when you're going through burnout, hopefully you won't get there. You'll catch it ahead of time and be able to use the tools right then and there. And I often say, like, don't wait to go to therapy until you're in crisis. Like, don't wait to have your toolbox until you're in, like, going through burnout, because you're going to be like, wait a minute, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm already there, right? So really the key is to kind of, oh, good, thank you, is to have this self-assessment and to really know yourself. So each of us are individuals. We have our unique experiences. We come from all different places, and you know yourself the best. As much as I'm an expert in this area, you are an expert of you. So I want everybody to think about kind of knowing yourself and thinking about, how does your body react when you're dealing with stress or burnout, when you're feeling overwhelmed? We all have signs that our body is giving us, but oftentimes we miss them. And the mind-body connection is real. Oftentimes I'll hear things like people getting headaches, clenching their jaw, their shoulders kind of start rising up and they don't realize it, shoulder and back pain, right? And so if we really take a moment to tune in and ask ourselves, how do I experience overwhelm, emotion, stress? We can start identifying and knowing those things. And then if we're having kind of daily check-ins with ourselves, like, how am I really doing today? Not like a friend saying, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm okay, I'm fine, thanks for asking. But really pausing and asking yourself, how am I really doing? How am I feeling? If you start noticing, wow, I kind of feel like my jaw is tight, use that. Your body is giving you a signal. Listen to it. Because oftentimes we live in this world that we are all go, 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 hustling, doing as much as we can, which is part of the problem with burnout and kind of why people are getting more burnt out. But we're missing those signals. And if we can catch them before, you can then start using the tools, hitting that reset button, and not getting to the point. My hope is to not get to the point of burnout.
So I'll share that in my journey of getting through my own mental illnesses and learning how to be a person in the world with all these things that were happening in my brain and happening in the world, tuning into myself and learning to know myself felt extremely foreign to me. I was a person with a deep level of self-hatred, a deep level of lack of self-confidence. And all of those things made it really difficult for me to examine myself because, like, why would you want to examine the worst person in the world? But what I learned that was really helpful to allow me to start approaching this was to approach my own thoughts, my own feelings with a sense of curiosity and as a neutral observer. Like, oh, it's interesting that you thought that in this moment. Why did that come up? And that often felt fake. It often felt very weird. But over time, as I practiced, it gave me a level of detachment from those thoughts and feelings so that they felt less immediate and they felt less world-ending.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, because you are so insightful now and in tune to yourself that you can probably catch that and be like, oh, that's what's happening right now, right? What can I do about it? And that's really the key, is to be curious about yourself, your signs, your symptoms. We all experience stressors, the world differently. So it's important that we know that about ourselves. And a few check-in questions that I like to tell people to use is how am I doing right now? Like, how am I really doing? But also, what's working and what's not working? Sometimes we can identify what's not working before we can identify what's actually working. But if we can identify that, that's the first step to actually making a change. If we're like, okay, this is not working for me. Okay, what are my options? What are my tools? What can I do now? And the other thing I wanted to mention was yes, that, it was actually on the other slide as well, but it's okay. You can leave that one there. That sometimes, that mental illness and other things, you can't tell, right? You don't always tell what people are going through, because we have our external experiences and our internal experiences. So I always like to remind people that we don't have Post-it notes, although I do have Post-it notes on the table, but we don't have Post-it notes on our foreheads, walking around this world, sharing our struggles. And I think that's really important to remember, because all of us are going through something. I think the first line of my book is, life is tough. It's something like this. I'm going to misquote myself, but it's like, life is tough, but it doesn't have to feel so tough. So life is difficult. We're all going through so much. So these kind of check-in questions can be really useful. And yes, everyone has bad days, but it's important to I usually say this differently, but it's okay. But it's important to note if you're having more bad days than okay days. So I say what's important is what's happening on most days. Okay. And kind of being curious about that and understanding how you're functioning in the world. If your daily functioning is being impacted, meaning your sleep is off, not just off on one night or 2 nights, but your sleep, your appetite, your mood, you start isolating, you're more irritable. Those are things that should be kind of letting a light bulb go off. They're like, maybe something's going on here. Maybe I can seek some professional help. Now, if it's, again, more bad days than good days in that sense, again, maybe it's time to kind of really tune in and think about what's going on and what shifts can you make.
And I'll say about this stage of realizing that maybe it is burnout, maybe it's something going on in my life. I think we have a lot of shame around burnout. I think we have a kind of tough it out culture, especially in bookstores. And what I want to say is, burnout is just a natural reaction to all the things that are going on in the world and your life. And there's nothing wrong with you. Your body and your mind are just reacting in the best way they know how to the situation that you're in. And your job is to find the coping skills and the reactions that are the least harmful for you in that situation, and ideally what can help you get out of it.
And to kind of distinguish the two for a minute. So stress, we all have stress in our lives. And usually once the stressor passes, we're able to kind of get back into our daily routine. The stress is kind of relieved. Burnout usually is not just a weekend of sleeping in. Like, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cure burnout, so to say. But for being stressed, it could be a little mini vacation, getting away, things like that, taking a mental health day. For burnout, it's not really enough. For burnout also, it's like, think of a gas tank. It is when you are on empty. Like, I have nothing left to give is burnout. Stress is usually when people are like more doing, like, I have to get through this, the fight or flight, the stress response. Burnout is like, I just can't do it anymore. I'm on empty.
And so for book selling in particular, we all know it's retail. It's kind of a unique part of retail. There are really we discussed this in our prep calls as like 2 buckets of things that make burnout unique to bookselling. And we talked about external expectations of booksellers and internal expectations. And as far as external goes, there are so many things that contribute to our jobs being difficult. You have to deal with customers, you have to deal with coworkers, you have to deal with the news, you have to deal with expectations of your bookstore, whether it should make a statement on every political thing that happens, whether it's doing enough in the community, expectations of your community. We all know the customers that come in when something terrible happens on the news and just dump all their trauma on you while you're trying to process that trauma yourself. It's a very physical job. We have a lot of lifting and standing and walking. Your body is worn out by the end of the day. It's often a low-paying job. So what if you have to have a second job? What if you have to have a third job? What if you're part of the gig economy and you're a bookseller? It's a passion industry, right? So passion industries typically attract people who deeply, deeply care, will do whatever they can for the job, for the people in their community. And that's what makes it so, so easy to burn out.
So another thing with burnout with that, knowing that it is, passion driven. Oftentimes with burnout though, it's that we're not doing enough of what brings us joy. So, I think going back to your why is really important. And, I tell my clients this, I tell my social media community this all the time, like, what's your why? And I think if you're in bookselling and because it's your passion, remind yourself of that and find the joy in it, because it all goes back to the way we think about things. If we're like, I should do X, Y, Z, I like to respond to that with, who says you should? Do you want to? Do you choose to? But if we say I should, like I should comment about that, I should share about whatever in the news, really take a step back and think, do I want to? Do I choose to? And then shift the way you say it to yourself, because eventually our self-talk becomes our reality. And for instance, in my book, it's based off of cognitive behavior therapy, which is the idea that our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are linked. If you say to yourself, I should do X, Y, Z, and you don't do it, it's going to make you feel guilty, and there's going to be shame attached to that. But if you're like, I want to do this, I choose to do it, or I don't feel like doing it, there's really, I'm not going to say there's no shame, but maybe there shouldn't be shame, so to say. You're not internalizing it quite as much. It was a decision you made and it's over and done with. We can move on. So, I really think going back to this idea of remember what your why is. Are you doing this because you're passionate about it? Bring some more joy, into your life. More, again, the burnout is like the lack of that enjoyment. It's doing more of all the things we should be doing, that the world thinks we should be doing. And we're forgetting that we're humans with emotions, with experiences, with lives. And we need to do more of what brings us joy. But that doesn't mean adding more to your plate. I'm not saying that. I'm saying creating moments throughout your day of joy. Even if it's a breathing exercise, I do this all the time, like walking to the bathroom in between my sessions, or while I'm cooking, just taking a breath, like finding and creating those moments. It doesn't mean adding more. You don't want to necessarily add more to your plate.
Yeah, so a couple of things come up for me in that. Obviously, not all of bookselling can be the things that you want to do, but just reframing it as a choice gives you like that little bit of agency that you might feel like you don't have. We do have a little bit more power in our lives than it feels like sometimes. And often the choice is between doing the thing and doing something that is just feels impossible for us, or feels like it is just not an option. But maybe it is an option and you choose to continue. Like maybe leaving bookselling just doesn't feel like an option for you, but it is theoretically, but you're choosing to stay ideally. There are a lot of external factors that go into that, but if you can reframe and think about, this is difficult, but I'm making the choice to do it anyway, that feels like a little bit of power that you're taking back from the world. And
I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, I love that you said that because it's actually a growth mindset that you're talking about. And there's the fixed mindset and there's a growth mindset. And the fixed mindset is like, I can't do this. I'm like, that's the end of the story. And a growth mindset is, this is really hard and I'm doing my best. Or this is really hard and I'm trying my best. Or I don't know if I'm going to be able to succeed at whatever and I'm trying my best. And it just leaves the door open for opportunity and for growth. And it's really important to have that shift because again, the fixed mindset is kind of like, it's kind of like all or nothing thinking. And I think having more of a growth mindset really allows those opportunities to happen. And then it's focusing on what's in our control. Again, we can add the word and, or we can not and say, I can't do this, or I'm not doing it. Or we could say, I'm trying my best.
We definitely live in a very black and white culture where you win or you fail, you do the right thing or you do the wrong thing. But if you can allow yourself to have a little bit of grace and try and seed that into the community around you, that will be like a really powerful thing to help shift mindsets. And so we were talking about knowing yourself earlier when we were talking about figuring out if you're in burnout, but knowing yourself, I think, is also the most important part of preventing and fixing burnout. I think it's the most important part of knowing how to live a life that you love, because if you don't know yourself, you don't know the things that work for you. You don't know the things that give you hope or joy in or out of the workplace. For me, in my kind of healing journey, one of the things that brought me the most hope was learning about neuroplasticity and how if you do put in the conscious work, you can actually reshape your brain. You can change the connections your neurons are making, and that makes it easier and easier over time to think the way you want and react the way you want. And you can still react in those old grooves. You know, we get stuck in things from childhood and they never necessarily leave us, but we can recognize them earlier, say, oh, I'm doing it again. Let me try and redirect.
Yeah. And so the key with that is that you're not sitting in that space for too long. The goal isn't to never have anxiety or never feel overwhelmed. That's just unrealistic. It's kind of toxic positivity is the way I like to think of it. It's going to set you up for failure. But if we think, okay, it can be there for a minute, right? Or for a short time, we can identify it and be like, oh, all right, here I am again. What can I do differently next time? Or what can I do differently right now? So it's the goal is not to eliminate stress, right? Life is happening, stress is happening. The goal isn't to eliminate any of that, but it's to be able to know yourself well enough to be able to catch it and be like, now this is what I can do instead of just sitting in it.
There's a concept, I think it's in Buddhism, but it's definitely one of the Eastern traditions of the second dart. So the first dart is the thing that happens to you, your reaction to that. But then you can also have a reaction to the reaction. And that reaction is often shame. Like, why did I react that way? Or why am I doing that again? And if you can eliminate that second dart, that idea of belittling yourself, shaming yourself, judging yourself for the way you react, it makes it a lot easier to move past that initial reaction into something that's maybe a little healthier for you.
Yeah. And again, that's a growth mindset because what we can do is, and I do this with my clients actually, whenever I see clients and they say like, you know, whatever it was that was stressful that happened or overwhelming that happened or something didn't go the way they had hoped, I actually tell them, I don't want you to think what you could have or should have or would have done differently. I don't want that. I actually want, okay, the next time this is something like this is going to happen, what can you do differently? Right? So do you hear there's a difference there? So it's not I should have, could have, would have done this instead. That's where the belittling, the shame and all of that comes in. But the next time something like this happens, what can I do differently? And that again is growth mindset. It's leaving the door open. It's a little more hopeful, optimistic. Again, it's not toxic positivity, but it's optimistic and hopeful and more realistic. Like we can't go back in time. That's out of our control, but we can try to be better equipped for next time that life happens.
Well, and we kind of naturally moved into the internal expectations and the internal things that we have that make it a little more difficult to recognize and get through burnout. But I want to bring it back to the external, because the internal really, that helps you deal with the external. And I want to acknowledge, like, the external is different for everybody, and how you react to the external is different for everybody. Like, one of the things in bookselling, right, is that we have a mask we put on for the customers, and that may be more or less a piece of you depending on who you are. Like, if you're neurodivergent, you might be wearing a mask in public all the time. That's exhausting. If you're a person of color, like, you have to hold these expectations of the world and react to them in a different way than I do as a white person. You know, if I'm sitting there with resting bitch face looking miserable, somebody's a lot more likely to just assume I'm having a bad day than for a Black person who does the exact same thing in the exact same situation, but people make different assumptions about them. So building yourself up internally really helps you deal with the parts that you can't control, the things that are societal, that other people are putting on you, that you can't change. I mean, if I can't work on something to change it, if I see a problem and I can't try and fix it, I start spinning. I start spiraling and spinning my wheels. And one of the things that's helped me is, well, at least I can work on my own reactions to the situation.
And that's bringing it back to focusing on what's in your control, right? So I don't want to say if there's nothing else you get out of this, that's the one thing, but I do hope that you remember this, to focus on what's in your control. Because again, life is going to happen, stress is going to happen, and we start feeling out of control, and we start feeling more overwhelmed and anxious and emotional when we feel like we lost control. But there is always things that are in our control, and there's always going to be things out of our control. Actually, in the book, I have kind of a diagram of explaining what's out of our control and in our control with different examples. But we can always control how we respond. Maybe not that initial reaction, because we're human and we have emotions. We should have emotions. That's allowed. We're supposed to. But how we respond, and kind of taking that pause and being like, okay, this is what's going on right now. This is what I need. What do I need right now? Is a great question in that kind of situation. For me, a lot of times it's to get moving, or to go on a run, or to just escape from the situation, to remove myself for a moment and to take a breath and then to come back. And sometimes we have to communicate that, though. Like, I'm thinking my house with 2 young kids, like, I have to communicate, like, all right, mommy needs a minute. Give me a second, right? That's a tool in my toolbox to kind of remove myself. But communicating it is really important, because nobody's a mind reader. So even when you're in the bookstore or you're at work, communicating with your colleagues and with other people, like, this is what I need right now, is really important.
And I can't emphasize enough that, particularly for me, the most important part that we've been talking about is the knowing yourself part, partly because that was the most difficult thing for me. But how can you communicate your needs to somebody else if you don't understand them? How can you communicate your emotions to somebody else, or your reactions? If you don't really know what's going on in there, it just all feels bad. How you respond to stress, all of it is a lifelong journey. Like, I'm sitting up here, I'm on a panel with a psychologist. I am someone who has done a lot of the work, and my family will tell you, I stress all the time. I will catch myself spending hours thinking about and working on a project that I can't do anything about it. And then I have to see myself doing that in the moment and find a way to stop, find a way to move on, and tell myself, like, the problem will be there tomorrow. If you really want to stress about it, think about it tomorrow.
Yeah. And you're right. It all comes back to knowing yourself. So, really being able to identify what's working, what's not working, and then to do something about it. So that actually brings us to what's in our toolbox. So I talk a lot about having our own unique coping toolbox. And I want to emphasize the word unique, because we are all unique individuals. And if I told you what's in my toolbox, which I'm happy to share with you, but if I told you what's in mine, it may not work for you. Because if you're not a runner and you're feeling stress, you're not going to go running. So it's important to know you and to know what you're going to do in those situations. And we can't always know, right? Because life happens. Plans don't always go as planned. So every tool is also not going to work for every situation. And that's okay. We have to acknowledge that. We have to accept that. But that's why we have to have more than one tool in our toolbox and being able to kind of shift them and swap them in and out as life is happening. And as we're going through different phases of our life, things might not work so easily for us anymore. I always recommend that we have at least 3 tools in our toolbox. And there's a reason for that. One reason is because not every tool is going to work. But the other one is if I was feeling stressed and overwhelmed right before I stood up here today or said, and I told you that running is the only one in my toolbox, I can't be like, see ya, Fred, good luck. I'm going to go on a run now. That's not going to work. So we have to have other tools that can work in different situations. And at least one, I like to be internal, which is just like the breathing exercise that we did, which is why I had us do it together. So you all have at least one tool in your toolbox already, but something internal that nobody else needs to see that you're doing it. Nobody else needs to know that you're doing it. But for instance, if I said I'm feeling stressed and I want to call Fred and Fred's not available, what am I going to do? Right? Or if I can't go running, what am I going to do? I could do a breathing exercise. I could do a relaxation technique. I could use mindfulness, meditation, all imagery, all of those things nobody needs to know you're doing, and you don't need something else with you in order to do it. So at least one, I really do recommend to be internal. Are we doing that exercise now?
I think we're going to give it a little bit because I want to talk about, for me.
Yes.
So your example of just
Going
saying,
on a quick run.
I'm going to go run.
See ya.
Reminds me of one of the things that I want to talk about, which is really interrogating whether your tool is escapism or not. If it's avoiding your problems rather than tackling them, just putting them off and putting them off. For me, the best example is reading. Used to be that my self-care was, I'm going to go read. I'm going to go read for hours. I'm going to go read and really not think about this problem until it's too late and I'm spiraling and everything is terrible. Reading is no longer in my coping toolbox. Not only is it a part of my job, which is one of the things that I need to cope with, but it turned out that it was escapism for me. And escapism is something that, while it can help temporarily, it's not going to, in the long term, help you build up a life you want to live. It's going to help you avoid life.
Yeah. So I love that example. And thank you for adding that. Because distraction, for instance, or escapism works until it no longer works. So it's okay to get into a book and distract yourself and escape for a certain amount of time, right? And then reality hits and it's like, all right, now how am I going to solve that problem? And now I have to maybe take action. So that's great. And I'm glad you mentioned that. The other thing I want to say before we get to talking about your personal toolbox is that when we're thinking about what tools you're going to add, I want you to think about, do I actually see myself doing this? Okay. If you can't see yourself doing it, don't put it in your toolbox. If you're like, maybe, I don't know, I've never done it, put it in. You're going to give it a try. And if it's not working for you, I want you to get rid of it. Okay. The other key is to practice. Because for instance, the diaphragmatic breathing tool that we shared, if that is something you want to add to your toolbox, and maybe in 2 weeks from now, or maybe even tonight, if you have a flight home or tomorrow, and you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, you might be like, oh, I'm going to do diaphragmatic breathing, but I don't remember how to do that. And now you're like, oh, I have to start researching. How do I do diaphragmatic breathing? Do I breathe in through my nose? Do I do this? Do I do that? That's not going to work. It's going to make it more stressful, more anxiety provoking. So I want you to practice whatever tools you use. I want you to practice them to the point that you are a pro at them, to the point that literally before I step up on stage and speak, and I do a lot of speaking, I take one breath. That's it. I take one breath. And I do it almost as a preventative to lower my stress level just in case. And actually, that's what I want you to do, that your coping toolbox tools are not just your stress management tools, but they're going to become your self-care practices that you do on a regular basis. They can be the same tools. They're preventative tools and they're stress management tools. That way, you know you are a pro at them. But again, they may not work for every situation. So then you have to think about what other tools you can also pull from in different situations that you might need. And sometimes you need more than one. Like I might take a breath, I might have to take a walk, and then I might have to talk to my husband or call my mom or something like that too. Like sometimes you need a few at the same time, and that's also okay.
And I'll mention, like, these are baseline things to get really practiced at, to have as like an automatic go-to in your life. They are things that can change over time. What was working for me last year might not work for me this year, but this is just like one part of taking care of yourself and managing all of this. There are so many other ways that you can help yourself. There's therapy, there's psychiatry, there's all sorts of other things. This was one of the most accessible things that we could talk to you about in the span of an hour. But there are a lot of resources out there. As I mentioned, we've got the resource slide at the end. And as you get into the world of, thinking about how to shift things for yourself, you'll find more and more tools. But I think this is a good time to do the part of these sessions that I personally dread the most, which is activity, talking to each other. But then I always appreciate it at the end. So hopefully you guys will too. So if you don't mind moving to tables so you can have like 3 people per table minimum, we're going to have you just talk to each other about what your go-to tools are and whether they're serving you now. And maybe you'll get some ideas from each other.
Yeah. And I want to add too that even though I know that sometimes we dread meeting other people and talking, that connection and support is actually a tool in our toolbox as well. As much as I think we all feel like we're kind of all connected through social media these days, we're actually lacking a lot of that connection. So if nothing else, it's a great time to just meet somebody else and have that connection as well.
And you're probably maybe a little bit burnt out on connecting and meeting people by the end of this conference. We've done a lot of that. We've practiced that skill. So now you've practiced it. Keep going. We'll give you a little bit and then we'll come back and we'll do Q&A and talk a bit about how that was for you and whether you discovered anything new.
And there's Post-it notes in the middle. If you guys want to jot down any like new tools that somebody mentions or you want to jot down your tools, feel free to grab the Post-its also.
Okay. We're wrapping up. We've got about 10 minutes left. So we've got our ABA room minder who will bring you the mic. But we wanted to know how that was for you, what you got out of it, if you have any questions, if anything surprised you.
Or if you have a new tool in your toolbox that you want to share with us, or you met a new friend. I love it.
I just wanted to share one of my tools that's been working really well for me this year. I have kind of like 3 main hobbies that for a long time I was trying to like do some of them every day. And that was sometimes working and sometimes stressful. And like just like the 3 things that I know will bring me joy that I'm trying to find time for in my very busy life. And so this year, the system I set up for myself is I do an hour a day of one of my 3 major hobbies, but it's a different one every day. So I write on Mondays and Fridays. I read on Wednesdays and Saturdays. I exercise on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And on Sunday, I can do anything concrete that brings me joy. And it's been a really good like reminder for myself that like, no matter how busy I am, no matter how stressed I am, no matter what's going on, like I can find an hour. It can be I get up an hour earlier than I normally would, or stay up an hour later, or I do 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at lunch, 20 minutes at night. And like, that's like really doable. And it's easy to tell myself that like you can find an hour and you can do anything for 20 minutes. So like, let's just make it happen. And so that's been really helpful for me to like make sure that I'm finding time for that joy. And then also it's been really helpful for me to like be adaptive of that system and give myself grace, because I had done other like similar kind of challenges for myself. And like, if I got out of it or I missed a day, like then I would beat myself up about it. And so now it's been really helpful to be like, okay, I'm not going to write the great American novel on Monday, but I can like talk to myself in my outline for an hour, or like I can put an audiobook on while I'm doing other things, or I can stretch 15 minutes 4 times instead of like going on an hour-long run or like whatever. So it's been really nice to like adapt that tool and to keep it something consistent forever, so that when I really need it, it's something, or even when it's hard because I'm stressed about other things, it's something that like I'm used to, and then I know how to make it work for myself, and it always makes me feel better having done it. So that's been fun.
Yeah, I love that so much. And there's just a few things I want to say about that. I love it. And I love the mindset shift that you also have that comes along with it, because that's why it's going to stick, is because you're allowing yourself that grace and that self-compassion that if I only have 20 minutes, it's fine. Like I don't need to do it for the full hour. And if I don't feel like doing it today, it's also okay. But the basics are there and you're going to continue that. So that's amazing. So I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you.
And I'll also say, so that's a perfect segue to this quote, have a life out of the bookstore. That is in quotation marks, not just because it's advice from it's not advice from me. It's so every year we have a staff party. My store has been around for 50 years and the same owner has been making the speech every single year of those 50 years. And every year it's basically the same. But one of the things he says every year, I'm so lucky to have an environment where this is the case. He says, you have to have a life outside of the bookstore. So your hobbies reminded me of that. And another coworker I have who is retiring this week after 42 years of being a frontline bookseller. God bless her soul. Also said in her last little talk to us, you got to have hobbies. You have to, and this is something I'm still working on, you have to be able to leave it behind when you physically leave it behind. Don't carry it with you throughout the day. And that feels hard for me. And, depending on your role at the store, it might not always be entirely possible, but learning to have something to step away from it with is really important. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you guys today for everything. I just wanted to ask, we, as you know, I'm a manager at my bookstore, and a lot of my booksellers that I work with express burnout concerns with me. And I just didn't know if you guys had any advice on how to support other people who are going through burnout.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm sorry to hear that they're all coming to you with that. And I'm happy to hear that they're all coming to you, because that means that you're a safe space for them, right? They're coming to you, they're opening up. And I think that's huge for you to kind of acknowledge that. But I also think, a lot of the things that we spoke about today, I think you can bring back to them, right? Like you can say, I want you to find more joy. What's your why? You can help them build their toolbox. You can be a source of support for them. I think even if you can, sometimes like little group outings, or let's take this break, or even encouraging those things. I do a lot of corporate wellness also. And a lot of the things that I speak to the managers about in the senior level is you need to model these behaviors also. So it's one thing for us to tell people, like, I want you to take a break. You should have a mental health day. You should do this. But you doing it also and communicating it and showing it, I think also then allows them to feel like, oh, they're taking a mental health day. They're going to, go outside for lunch today and not just sit in the store and eat. It's okay to do it. So I think, modeling those behaviors is important, communicating those behaviors, and then also putting, some boundaries in place as well. Like, you know what, you don't have to be here at whatever time, come in at this time instead, like kind of putting boundaries in place and providing them with some resources that we're going to show later as well, which I think is in the slides also.
Yeah. So I'll also say I'm a frontline bookseller. I'm not a manager, but I've talked a lot to my coworkers who have managed or currently do manage, and it's a very weird role to have. So first I'll say your frontline booksellers see when you're taking a break. They also see when you're running yourself into the ground, and you might be doing it unintentionally. You might be doing it so that they don't have to, but they see it. And that becomes the default work culture, where if you're constantly going, if you don't sit, if you don't take a break, if you don't take a sip of water when you need it, if you're just constantly trying to get the next thing done, they see that and feel like that is expected of them as well. So modeling healthier behavior is really important. And I've seen that shift happening in my bookstore as well. And when my manager sits, I'm like, oh, okay, we can do this. But yeah, speaking to the management side of things, I think you kind of become the default therapist of the store, the mom of the store, the go-to person. And I think being able to set that aside when you leave is really important, because you can't take on and tackle all of your own problems and every single one of your employees' problems too. So, there's kind of this divide between frontline bookseller and manager, and responsibilities and the things that are expected of you, but also, like, I've been told, once you're a manager, like, your relationships with those people change. So you might not be able to, you can't gossip with them. You can't unload on them, but they can still unload on you. So taking care of yourself is a really important part of making that whole workplace culture better for them too.
And I'm just going to add one thing so for 5.5 years, I worked at the oldest New York City public hospital, Bellevue Hospital. And every client I saw had like a sad or story from the one before, so to say. And I remember one day somebody was like, how are you managing? Like, how are you going home with these stories? And the example I used, I really did this. And I think it's a good imagery exercise in a way for people to do if you feel like you need to. I used to say, and I'm not like throwing away their trash, so to say, but I would almost imagine myself leaving all of that in the trash can. And then I would take, like every night, we had to take the trash can from my office, like to the outside door for the janitors to pick them up in the middle of the night. And literally I would imagine like, all right, I'm throwing away all the stress of today and I'm leaving it here. And like literally I used that exercise with myself to allow me to then walk in. Thank goodness I didn't have kids at the time, but to then like walk into the rest of my life. Because I do believe that life is like a pie. We don't have work life. We don't have home life. Life is life. And at different points in life, different phases of life, our pie looks a little different, like different slices. And that's okay. That's as we're going through life. But I would then let myself just kind of leave it there, take a deep breath as I'm closing that door and be like, all right, until tomorrow. And then I come back to that. So maybe something like that will also work. But it's so important that you're taking care of yourself, especially as others are sharing their stories and their difficulties with you as well. So having your toolbox is really important.
And I'll say to the visualization part of your comment, I'm a person who feels like deeply allergic to things that are cheesy, but by God, they help. And Let yourself be cheesy, let yourself be vulnerable. It's really annoying, but those things do help. Sorry.
I'm cheesy too.
Lean into it. So I think we're just about out of time, but we've got like 1 or 2 more slides. They've got resources. You can access them through the app and the program on the website. These are really good things to have in your bucket. I will mention Bink, of course. If you haven't heard about them, learn about them ASAP. I think right now the free therapy sessions are 6 sessions over 6 months, and those are not need-based as far as I can remember. So you don't have to prove that you're financially needy. You just ask, and they get you set up. And our contact info, I think, is on the last slide. But yeah, just feel free to get our information. I'm happy to keep in contact, talk with anybody who wants to talk about this stuff. Obviously, I can talk about this stuff all day. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
And I'm just going to add also that feel free to email me also. I always like to remind people that social media, email, even this is not therapy, but I'm always happy to point you in the right direction, give recommendations or resources as well. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!